series called What's Next in Wellness, Moving Beyond Eat Less, Exercise More. For those of you who joined us live last week, welcome back. And for those of you who weren't able to make it live, welcome. We're glad to have you. I noticed that many of you did listen to the recording from last week, or at least you downloaded it, which is great. You'll probably be able to make better sense of where today's content fits in if you listen to part one. So just for those of you who were not with us last week, we'll do a quick introduction. I'm Rebecca Johnson, and with me today is Sarah Sun. Sarah is here today to handle any technical issues that we might have kind of behind the scenes and to assist us with the Q&A session at the end. My role has to do with the development of mindful eating products and services kind of in the corporate and workplace wellness space. And just on a personal note, for those of you who didn't hear my story last week, I'll just say that I'm a huge supporter of mindful eating and the non-diet weight neutral approach we talked about last week. It has definitely changed my life personally and given me a whole new set of tools to work with professionally. So let's do this. Just a quick reminder so that you can participate at the end if you're interested. You'll all see in the top right hand of your screen a control panel, which looks a little bit like what we have on the screen here. If you do have any technical issues, you can just type them in the questions box and then press enter. Sarah will see those behind the scenes and she can chat with you to resolve them. And there's two ways actually that you can submit questions for us to respond to at the end. The first one is to type them in the questions box. And you're welcome to type questions in at any time. We won't get to them till the last 15 or 20 minutes, but just so you don't forget them, you're welcome to type them in. And if you prefer to ask your question verbally, you're welcome to raise your virtual hand here. I just highlighted that symbol on the screen, and Sarah will unmute you at the end. One note, if you do want to ask your questions verbally, you need to have entered the audio pin that you were given at the beginning so that she can do that. And lastly, just a reminder that in the same way we did last week, I'll send out an email that has a couple of handouts and also the link to today's recording. So let's do this. Just to provide some continuity, I want to very briefly review what we talked about last week. Essentially, we spent some time exploring three assumptions of the current approach to health, with the general takeaway on that point being that in some ways these assumptions are flawed, and so they've directed the health promotion industry in a manner that, again, in some ways has actually contributed to struggles related to eating and weight rather than helping resolve them. We then talked a little bit about the evidence supporting the need for a paradigm shift away from this approach towards a perspective with three key tenets, and those tenets were weight neutral, non-diet, and mindfulness-based. So today, we're going to jump into a little more detail by talking about what mindful eating is, how it incorporates those three tenets, how it helps, and who benefits from it. And then specifically, I'll spend some time on a model called the mindful eating cycle, which we use in our programs and training, and which provides a great structure for teaching and learning the tenets and principles that we're talking about. And I'll also offer a few ways at the end of today's session that you can integrate this model into your personal life, your professional life, or your organization's well-being offerings. So let's jump in with a definition of mindful eating. As many of you have probably noticed, mindfulness and mindful eating, especially in the last couple of years, have become really popular topics. And I would say, as with the growth and popularity of any concept, mindful eating sometimes gets misinterpreted or watered down or even used inaccurately. So I just wanted us to kind of all understand what this phrase really means. Many times people think of mindful eating narrowly, just as eating slowly or without distraction. And while those are really important parts, mindful eating can be a much broader concept than that. So at a high level, we could think of mindful eating as the application of the mindfulness principles that we talked about last week to our eating behaviors and our relationship with food. And just as a review, the kind of the tenets of mindfulness that most mindfulness practitioners would agree upon are that it means having a greater awareness of the present moment, and that includes both our internal experiences and what's happening around us. It also includes sort of the ability to non-judgmentally observe and accept these experiences, and from that to be able to pause between our observation, our trigger, our cue, and our reaction. And so, in effect, we get to make more intentional decisions around our responses. Now, if we drill down a little bit further, because that can be kind of vague, there's another definition of mindful eating that the founder of our program came up with, which I absolutely love. Mindful eating is eating with intention and attention. The intention of feeling better when you're finished than you did before you started, and with the attention necessary for noticing the food and its effects on your body and mind. So how exactly we cultivate intention and attention will become more clear as we progress through today's content, but I'll first share with you some common goals of mindful eating that can further explain how this is not just about what we do while we're eating, but how we relate to food, and even to a lesser degree to physical activity and self-care. So there's a handful of goals of mindful eating. They include to cultivate awareness about our own internal signals, such as hunger and fullness and satiety. And then to recognize non-hunger triggers and meet those non-hunger needs in more effective ways than eating. The goals of mindful eating also include learning to balance eating for nourishment with eating for enjoyment. We talked a little bit about this last week, and we'll continue to talk some more about it today. It means also eating for optimal satiety and satisfaction, so not just for optimal physical nourishment or physical fullness, but really relating to food in a way that satisfies our bodies, minds, and spirits. And then finally, and this is a big one, this is where kind of the concepts of mindfulness get transferred to other aspects of our lives. Mindful eating leads to using the energy we consume to live vibrantly. And so certainly this includes a satisfying and sustainable relationship with activity, but also kind of taking care of our emotional and spiritual and intellectual needs well. So how exactly does mindful eating help? If you think about it, many people today who struggle with food react mindlessly to triggers, which may be unrecognized or unexamined, and triggers may be things in the environment, or they may be thoughts or feelings. So in other words, there's this mindless kind of automatic reaction to those triggers where we're repeating past actions again and again, oftentimes feeling powerless to change or even unaware of what the real issue is. And then paradoxically, problematic eating behaviors are sometimes a symptom of other unmet needs in our lives. So mindfulness basically increases the awareness of these patterns and creates space between the trigger and our reactions, and in essence interrupts old patterns so that we can create new ones. So kind of through this process, it empowers us to break our old automatic or habitual chain reactions and discover options that work better. You know, perhaps maybe the most effective way to understand specifically how mindful eating helps is for us to jump into the mindful eating cycle, which is a very powerful and practical model developed by Dr. May, which serves as both a great structure for teaching mindful eating concepts, but also for learning them and integrating them into our lives in a really practical way. It helps us understand and implement ideas and skills and tools so that we can change our relationship with food and activity. There's 6 decision points on the mindful eating cycle. They're on the screen now. And starting at the top, why is the cycle driver? So why do I eat to begin with? And then there's when. When do I want to eat or when do I choose to eat? What do I eat? How do I eat, meaning how do I get the food from the container or plate into my body? How much do I eat, and where do I invest the energy that I've consumed? So there's obviously quite a bit to each of the 6 decision points that we cover fully in our programs and workshops, but what I want to do now is just give you some highlights so you can get a sense of the way that this kind of practically applies. If we start with the first decision point, why, as I said, this is the cycle driver, and what that means is that it influences every single decision that's made afterwards. So for example, if I'm eating primarily for fuel and nourishment, the types of foods I'm likely to select may be very different than if I'm eating in response to emotional cues like stress or boredom or a need for reward. And so when I'm eating in response to those type of triggers, I'm more likely to choose foods that are convenient and energy dense and highly palatable. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with choosing foods that are energy dense and really delicious. In fact, they provide a wonderful opportunity for pleasure and enjoyment and energy. But these type of foods can become a problem when they are our primary or only way of coping or entertaining or distracting ourselves. So how is this related to the conventional kind of eat less, exercise more approach? I would say that for most people, understanding the why is the missing link. But despite this, there's very little focus usually on the why in the conventional approach. So mindful eating does a great job of this, of helping people explore this decision point when they may not have done so before. One of the direct applications of mindfulness certainly is that it helps us understand our why, and it does this in two ways. So from the kind of 30,000-foot view, the why decision point helps us understand our own big picture about food and self-care through the lens of non-judgmental awareness. We get to look at our patterns and our past experiences and our present-day beliefs and thoughts and feelings, which is important to do because there's lots of information here that helps us increase our awareness of what our common triggers for eating might be, how we typically respond to them, how maybe using a restrictive approach in the past has worked. And once we understand these things, we can effectively address them. Now, in the micro view, it's really helpful for all of us, but particularly people who struggle with food, to understand what an urge to eat is about in the moment it's occurring. So if we can develop the ability to identify exactly what's going on in the moment, we can then create options for responding in more effective ways than eating and ultimately learn to meet our true needs. So there's great value in asking ourselves, what is this urge to eat about and what's really going on here? Before we move on to the next decision point, I just wanted to point out that one of the things that I appreciate about mindfulness and mindful eating the most, and I think is really valuable to people, is that it takes an attitude of non-judgment. Because usually there's not a lot of value in judging or admonishing ourselves for whatever we're thinking or feeling in the moment or whatever our behaviors or responses have been in the past. In fact, I think that many people who struggle with food and weight have a tremendous amount of guilt and shame or other uncomfortable emotions around food, and guilt and shame are not particularly helpful in the change process and can actually fuel problematic eating behaviors. So we will do our patients and clients a great service if we can help them objectively observe themselves and see their past behaviors and habits as simply coping mechanisms that were valuable at one point but no longer are, or as the predictable result of incorrect messages they received along the way. So moving on to the when decision point, there is a great deal around the decision point when, and I just want to give you a few highlights again so that you can begin to see the practical application of this and how it differs from the conventional approach. So many programs and interventions give people rules to follow about when to eat. Most of you have probably heard or even given out rules. Again, I know that I said these things earlier in my health promotion career in a very well-intentioned way. Rules like always eat breakfast, or don't eat after 7 p.m. at night, or eat every 3 hours, or my favorite, do not let yourself get hungry. And while these rules are well-intentioned, what they actually end up doing is kind of disconnecting people from their natural fuel needs and encouraging them to ignore or distrust their internal signals. If you have ever tried to follow a diet or an eating plan that had specific rules about when to eat that were kind of predetermined, you might have noticed that sometimes you're eating when you're not hungry or not eating when you are. So you can begin to see the disconnection there. So here's one really practical tool that relates to the decision point that is highly integrated into our programs. So one of the neat things about creating a more mindful relationship with food is that it helps you create a pause between an urge to eat and your reaction. It's almost like we need to make space to assess and intentionally respond rather than either mindlessly automatically eating or just immediately deciding we mustn't because the rules say we can't or it's not the right time or whatever. So one really neat way that we use to help people kind of create that pause is to ask themselves a question. So we suggest whenever you have the urge to eat, ask yourself this question: am I hungry? And although it sounds like probably a deceptively simple question on the outside, it can really be the gateway to discoveries that have significant impacts on what we do from that point forward. Which brings me to an important point, which I just can't drive home enough, and I think is very different maybe than the conventional approach as well. And that's about the purpose of asking the question, am I hungry? So the purpose of asking the question, am I hungry, isn't to decide whether you're allowed to eat. It's to help you figure out why you want to in the first place. I'm going to say that again. The purpose of asking, am I hungry, isn't to decide whether you're allowed to eat, but to help you figure out why you want to in the first place. Because when you pause, you can tune in and figure out whether your urge to eat came from a need for fuel or from another trigger, like a physical cue or an emotion or an environmental cue like television or donuts in the break room or something. So the image I have here on the screen, I wanted to share this with you. It's from an activity that we do in one of our programs where we do quite a bit of work on differentiating between the need for fuel and other needs. Ultimately, recognizing why you want to eat gives you the opportunity to meet your true needs, which is one of the most important parts of the process for people who have struggled with overeating or dieting or bouncing back and forth between the two. A second really practical tool is a hunger and fullness scale. Many of you have probably seen some version of this before, and I just wanted to talk briefly about how and why we use it. The question, am I hungry, is actually not easy to answer for many people, especially people who've struggled with years of dieting or overeating and who've become disconnected with their own hunger or just no longer trust hunger to guide their eating choices. So we use a hunger and fullness scale because it helps people establish just how hungry they are, so they can kind of begin reconnecting with that innate mechanism, and also so they can decide more intentionally about whether and how much to eat. So let's move on to what? What is the third decision point in the mindful eating cycle? And I think this is where, in many cases, the traditional approach to quote-unquote healthy eating has really gone awry. For many people today, thinking about what they should eat is confusing and sometimes kind of guilt-inducing. There's a very pervasive, good food, bad food mentality in our society today, and I think that mentality creates trouble. Not only because it fosters rigid thinking, but because what's good and bad frequently change according to the specific diet or book or expert. Many of you may remember, I'm just beginning to date myself here a little bit, but the 1990s when fat was the enemy. And then there came the 2000s when good fats were in but carbs were out, but of course only the bad carbs. And then recently, I don't know if most of you heard about this, but there's been a reversal of the recommendations on cholesterol in food. So even after 25 years of a fairly certain stance on that one, that has been reversed. The point here is that following external rules about what to eat is really like trying to hit a moving target. And it's not necessary, and I don't even think it's the ideal solution. In fact, I would say that if we're going to have a sustainable, enjoyable relationship with food, we need to know how to be our own experts in any situation. And that applies not just to a general healthy population, but even to people with specific chronic conditions like metabolic syndrome or diabetes. So what we do differently here is, instead of a lot of rules and kind of all or nothing good food, bad food thinking, mindful eating offers a fairly straightforward guideline that helps us choose foods that will balance nourishment with enjoyment. And that simple kind of high-level guideline is 3 words. You've probably seen them before. Here they are: balance, variety, and moderation. So I just want you to pause for a minute and consider how different the health landscape would be if more people ate a balanced diet with variety and in moderation most of the time. Now, having said that, for many people that sounds good, sounds like a great idea, but we do recognize that most people, at least at first, need more structure than this. particularly people who have really struggled with food for a long time. Just these 3 words alone can make them a little nervous because maybe they simply don't trust themselves enough yet or know how to integrate these 3 words. How does this translate into the day-to-day decisions about what to eat? So we take this down one level and we offer structure in a way that keeps the person in charge and keeps them connected to their hearts and their bodies and their minds and their lives as they make decisions about what to eat. We do this through a few questions that we suggest people ask when deciding what to eat. 2 of those questions are, what do I want and what do I need? And so we definitely do recognize that it's important for all of us to consider what we want to eat, even if it's a fun food or something that has very little nutritional value. Eating enjoyable foods really must be part of the equation, because if it's not, we end up back in diet thinking, depriving ourselves with the same adverse consequences we discussed last week. This is one of the things that's really freeing for people about mindful eating, and honestly sometimes a little bit anxiety-provoking at first, because many people have been taught or taught themselves that what they want to eat should always take a back seat to what's most nutritious or what the allowed foods are, and that if they make any other choice, there's some reason to feel bad about it or feel guilty or ashamed. But really, as I said, even when someone has a specific condition like diabetes, it's even possibly more necessary for those people to learn how to make eating decisions without deprivation and in a way that aligns with the nature of the human experience. Now, having said all that, many times when we cover this part in workshops, people will respond and say, well, it sounds like you're suggesting that I just get to eat what I want whenever I want it. And it's not quite as simple as that. We're not suggesting that we just toss out nutrition information or concern about what nourishes our body and mind well, because we have to pay attention to that, absolutely. And so this is where the question, what do I need, comes in. And this question includes an assessment of things like, what would help create balance and variety? How do I want to feel after I eat? What foods leave me feeling energetic? What health goals do I have? And of course, we consider the nutritional value of food in this question. And on that note, I would say that nutrition information it's important, but it is a tool. It is one tool of many that we have that can help us decide what to eat. I think, unfortunately, these days, nutrition information is used as a weapon instead of a tool, and that this really contributes to the guilt and confusion around food selection. So just one final note on that, because this might have brought up some questions for some of you, and I'm also happy to field questions about this in the end. This part usually does. But I'll just tell you that especially as people first start practicing mindful eating, they certainly experience discrepancies between what they want to eat in the moment and what they feel they need. So we provide guidance on how to address this. There's quite a bit of work that's done around that, but I'll just leave you with one question that you or your patients or clients could ask if you're having trouble in the moment determining what food would help you balance wants and needs. And that question is this: what's the healthiest choice I can make right now that won't leave me feeling deprived? The other point I wanted to make is that, interestingly, the more people practice mindful eating and adopt and trust the non-diet approach, the more their wants and needs begin to align. So the more they sort of reintegrate foods that might have been forbidden and just essentially begin to trust themselves and that their bodies have a sense of balance and variety and moderation if only we listen and respond. The more we practice mindful eating, the easier it becomes for us to balance these two without guilt and without restrictive rules. Okay, let's move on to the fourth decision point, which is how. How do I eat? This is where we develop the habit of eating mindfully and without distraction. And one of the wonderful things that does for us is it allows us to get more satisfaction out of less food. More satisfaction out of less food. Although intention and attention play a big role in all of the 6 decision points, the how decision point really drives this concept home. So let's talk about a few examples of what eating with intention and attention mean. I'm going to provide in the email I send out after this webinar a handout, and it's a great article written by Dr. May called Mindful Eating, Get Out of Autopilot. There's lots of suggestions for applying the ideas of intention and attention in that article, but here's just a few examples. So we encourage setting a fullness intention before we even begin eating. How full do I want to feel after this meal? And that allows us the space to make an intentional decision about what we order, how much we serve. We also suggest that maybe choosing enjoyable foods rather than just foods on the current allowed list results in greater satisfaction from less food. And then there's a few suggestions that may be already kind of closely connected with mindfulness in your mind. So for example, take notice of the environment you eat in and see if you can reduce distractions or anything else that makes you feel uncomfortable emotions that could drive overeating. Experiment with breathing deeply before you start eating and possibly again during the eating process to keep yourself in a calm and centered state where you'll be more likely to notice the effects of the food and stop at just right. Mindful eating also, of course, encourages things like expressing gratitude for the food and all of the people and resources it took to bring to us, and savoring the smell and sight and taste of foods. The other really wonderful thing about these concepts is that they become very transferable to other aspects of our life. In fact, we often end the learning around the how decision point by asking people to consider what other areas of their life would benefit from more intention and attention. The fifth decision point is how much. How does mindful eating help us more often eat an amount that's just right, rather than eating to the point of too full or stuffed or sick? Here's just a conceptual point to know, and I didn't ever think much about this until I went through this training, but it was a really valuable thing to learn, and that's that how much we ultimately eat doesn't just get decided at the moment that we say, I'm going to stop or I'm not going to stop. It's very heavily influenced by all the decisions we make even before we start eating. Let me give you an example of that. If I've chosen to eat foods that align with what my body and mind are asking for, in other words, foods that balance nourishment and enjoyment, and I'm able to eat them mindfully and without distractions, I'm much less likely to overeat because, again, I am present for and I've chosen the appropriate foods to give me the satisfaction. I experience more satisfaction out of less food. This, I would say, is another place that diets and even many of the conventional healthy eating and weight-focused interventions kind of miss the mark, because many times those type of interventions suggest that people should decide how much to eat based on a predetermined number, like calories or serving size or portion size. In some cases, I think that's unhelpful in the long run for a couple of reasons. First, because it doesn't take into account all the factors that lead up to the amount we eventually eat, as we just discussed here. And second, because it really disconnects people from their own internal experiences and teaches them to rely on an external authority instead of themselves. There are many tools in the mindful eating toolbox that help us eat an appropriate amount based on our internal experience and our personal goals, rather than a predetermined amount. I'll give you just a couple here. So going back to the hunger and fullness scale, if we combine this same scale and begin to use it on the other end of the spectrum, and we combine that with a visual reminder of the size of the stomach, this can be a helpful starting point for people. So what I'd like you to do now is just make a fist with one of your hands. Make a tight fist and look at it. If you didn't know this already, the size of your fist is about the size of your stomach. I was appalled when I learned that. So if our stomach is this size, we have to remember how much food it takes to fill it, which is ultimately not a lot, maybe a couple of handfuls of food. And when we eat more than that, our stomach walls stretch, our stomach gets bigger, we may feel bloated, uncomfortable, And our body has to digest and process food it didn't ask for, so we may feel sluggish or tired or without energy. This visual alone, kind of the combining of these things, can be helpful to get people thinking about the difference between what our bodies need and what we often serve. But even more importantly, this brings up another point, which is that eating the right amount of food is not about being good in the moment or being a good person. It's really about feeling good. What the many times conventional eat less, exercise more interventions do is they position overeating directly or subtly as a bad thing or an unhealthy thing or something people quote unquote shouldn't do for reasons related to weight or health. And there's no denying that there certainly are negative consequences to chronically overeating. It doesn't usually support a person's best interests, but we really try to keep the shoulds and the should-nots out of the conversation and just help people reconnect with the #1 reason to reduce overeating, which is because it simply helps them feel good and have the energy to live their best lives. So helping people connect with how it feels to overeat versus how it feels to eat the just right amount is very powerful. So perhaps one of the most important things that mindful eating does is it kind of removes the guilt-inducing labels and conversations from this topic and simply helps people mindfully become aware of how good it feels to eat an amount that supports their best energy, their best life, and their greatest values. Okay, let's move on to the last decision point, which is where. This is a crucial decision point, and it's really about two things. I always think of it as two things. Where does the physical energy from the food we eat go? And then secondly, where's our emotional and mental and spiritual energy directed? I'll leave you with a couple of ways that the kind of non-diet, weight-neutral, mindfulness-based approach to this differs from what we may see in conventional eat less, exercise more interventions. I think I shared this graphic with you last week. I love it, though. It's a great symbol of the fact that, one of the unfortunate parts of the weight-focused and restrictive approach is that it sometimes turns physical activity into a math equation or a should. Exercise becomes positioned as a way to burn extra calories or maintain metabolism, or in some cases as penance for eating or even to earn the right to eat. So these messages over decades have really contributed, I think, to many people's negative associations and experiences with physical activity. So instead, mindful eating works to kind of disconnect exercise from food and math and guilt and penance and punishment. It helps people discover ways to connect with physical activity mindfully using the same principles of intention and attention we've already talked about. And so people get to experience activity as a positive choice in and of itself rather than as a means to an end. Also, kind of alternatively, instead of focusing on exactly how much our patients and clients should be doing or giving them specific guidelines to follow, which can often be overwhelming and counterproductive for people, particularly if they're very far away from meeting those guidelines. Many of our patients and clients might benefit by a simple shift in conversation and thought process. So for example, one interesting question that we suggest people ask themselves about activity is, what amount of exercise can I do joyfully and consistently? Because any amount of exercise or activity done joyfully and consistently is ultimately better for a person's well-being than the type of yo-yo exercising, which often resembles yo-yo dieting, or doing nothing at all. And then the last point about the where decision point is that I think it's important for all of us in our personal lives and our professional lives to remember that the point of eating is to fuel the vibrant, full lives we all crave and deserve. And the more we practice self-care and nurture all aspects of our health, including our body and our mind and our heart and spirit, the less we'll reach for food to do that for us. And then as we free ourselves from cycles of overeating and restrictive eating, we free up energy to nurture all those important elements of health better. So there's kind of an upward spiral here. Mindful eating is a gateway for vibrant living, and vibrant living makes it much more likely that we'll eat mindfully. So by now you probably already know the answer to this question. Who benefits from mindful eating? The short answer is anyone. Anyone who eats can benefit from bringing more intention and attention to their eating. Because if you think about it, mindful eating is really a fairly simple concept that can be kind of universally applied at home, at work, when you're dining out, on special occasions. It's flexible, and it doesn't depend on a limited list of foods, or it doesn't require time-consuming strategies like weighing and measuring and reference lists, so it fits into even the busiest lifestyle. It's also a very effective approach for resolving issues around food for people across the health spectrum. So certainly people who have struggled with yo-yo dieting or weight cycling and have tried numerous programs, including weight loss surgery, are especially likely to benefit because this isn't based on restriction or deprivation or indefinite amounts of willpower. And also people who are affected by chronic conditions like metabolic syndrome or diabetes benefit greatly because they learn sustainable self-management skills through mindful eating. And I think that just kind of universally one of the reasons mindful eating is so valuable is because we live in a diet-obsessed, food-abundant culture where there are messages to not eat and to eat everywhere, and where many people struggle with a love-hate relationship with food, where eating has become mindless and consuming and guilt-inducing. And as we talked about in the beginning, this troubled relationship with food for many people lies at the heart of some of the most common well-being issues in our society and is at the same time often just a symptom of deeper unmet needs. So mindful eating addresses this troubled relationship with food, and it returns eating to the natural, healthy, and pleasurable activity for fueling our lives the way it was meant to be. So the last minute or so of our content today before we open it up for questions is just going to be my way of sharing with you a few options for implementation of the concepts we've talked about today in the workplace, in clinical settings, in your own private practice, and even in your personal life. Just as a reminder, you're welcome to type your questions in at any point in the questions box or raise your hand, and Sarah will unmute you in just a minute. So I shared the screen with you last time. amihungry.com/resources is a great place to find lots of complementary resources, white papers, PowerPoints, assessments, articles, research. And then just in terms of what we do in the workplace and clinical and community settings, there are a variety of structured programs and services we offer. We have live programs that include facilitated workshops that can be delivered on-site or via webinar. We have workshops for the general population. We also have programs for people with prediabetes and diabetes, and those who are either considering or have undergone weight loss surgery. I don't have this on the screen here, but we do have a program for binge eating that's most appropriate for clinical therapy settings. Mindfulness and mindful eating have been proven very, very valuable in the eating disorders field, particularly with binge eating disorder. And of course, we need facilitators to run our live workshops, so we offer health professional training, and you can become a facilitator in any of the programs I just mentioned. We're also developing a training for coaching, which provides the structure that health professionals need to deliver mindful eating concepts effectively in a one-on-one setting. We're really excited about that. That will be ready for distribution in the first quarter of next year. So feel free to contact me if you want any more information about that. And then our newest version is a significantly enhanced version of our online mindful eating program. It's really interactive and engaging, and I think does an awesome job of delivering what are very personal, life-changing concepts in a virtual setting. We're in the midst of a significant enhancement of this, and I'm more than happy to demo it for any of you that are interested if you just contact me to set that up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave my contact information up on the screen, and I will open it up for questions. Sarah, do we have any hands up or anything, any questions written in at this point?
I don't have any questions at this point, so actually one just came in, so hold on. And I do have one
Good
person
timing.
that raised their hand.
Okay.
Yeah, Charlene, it looks like you have your hand raised, but you have not entered your PIN, so we would not be able to hear you. So go ahead and enter your PIN. The question comes from Deb. Do you find that logging calories consumed in a tracker or app is helpful or harmful? There are an abundance of wellness programs that strongly recommend tracking.
That is such a wonderful question, Deb, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So this is kind of our stance on that, and it comes from sort of years of experience with this. Logging food intake can be a slippery slope to preoccupation with food, and it can actually contribute to problematic eating behaviors. So we, as part of our programs, deliver an awareness journal, and we suggest that if people are interested, that they log and journal about their food, but not with amounts as a form of accountability or determining whether they've been good or bad that day. So we try to remove all that from the equation, and what we do suggest people do, though, is they focus on the connection between the foods they eat and how they feel, or the connections between their internal and external experiences and their urges to eat, or what they eventually decided to eat and how it made them feel. So what we want to help people do is make the connection between their physical, emotional, and environmental triggers and why, when, what, how, and how much they eat and where they invest their energy. But I think those techniques like counting and logging and weighing and measuring are, for most people, more problematic than helpful in the long run. Thanks for the question.
Great. Charlene typed in her question, being a dietitian and wellness coach specializing in diabetes, which training do you recommend?
Thank you for the question, Charlene. So we have a mindful eating for prediabetes and diabetes training, which will specifically give you the tools you need to deliver a diabetes curriculum. I'm happy to send you some information about that. What I would say is that the original mindful eating program is helpful for everyone, but our programs for diabetes and bariatric surgery and binge eating, they take these very universal concepts and they apply them to the specific challenges that those specific populations experience. So we use the same model, but we kind of build on it differently. So if your primary focus is diabetes, I would take the diabetes training. We are, and this is going to sound so promotional, and I'm just saying this because I want you to know it, but I hate to say salesy things like this, but we are, for the month of August, having a promotion where you can purchase a facilitator training and you can get a supplemental training for only $99. So if you were interested in doing both the mindful eating program and the mindful eating for diabetes, you could save some money during the month of August and get both done.
Great. Now we have two questions that are very similar, so I'm going to go ahead and ask both. The first one comes from Deborah. She says, how would you address someone who wants or feels they need structure? And then the second one is from Marissa. I have found that without any structure and solely asking patients to listen to their body, ask questions, etc., is hard for them to grasp. I have often started patients on a plan, but then modify it as time goes on. That way, they have some structure, particularly for those who don't eat all day long and then binge at night, and allow them to start listening to their hunger and fullness. What are your thoughts?
Thank you both for those questions. I will tell you that my sense of mindful eating in general is that it can feel to people a little loose and vague, and it can be difficult for health professionals and clinicians to teach, and for patients and clients to feel they have enough structure. I totally get that concern. I think it's a real one. So I will tell you that the mindful eating cycle and all of the many practical skills and tools and strategies that are taught during each of the 6 decision points gives people just that structure they need. In fact, I think that is one of the ways that we kind of stand out from the growing crowd is we offer that structure both for teachers and for learners. So probably from what I chatted with you about today, you might have gotten a little taste of that, and I can just tell you that I probably covered with you about 5% of the type of structure that we offer in our facilitator training and our workshops. So I think structure is important. I think it's necessary for most people, especially in the beginning. And I think the more you learn about the mindful eating cycle in our programs and trainings, the more you'll see that it will provide you as the health professional and your patients and clients exactly what you need.
Great. And another question from Deb. Do you estimate on what percentage of people on your program, I think she meant your program, actually lose weight, and what is the average weight loss?
That is a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. So because we're a weight neutral organization, and because we recognize that measuring weight pre and post, which would be sort of the only way we have those statistics, actually kind of runs counter to the messages and the integrity of our program. We don't collect that type of data. What I'll tell you for sure is that weight loss for many, many people who participate in our programs does happen. But I will tell you that it is a side effect of the changes that happen in their belief systems, in their thoughts, in their feelings, in their behaviors. So I don't have any concrete data for you. We do actually have, I think I can send you, if you send me an email, Deb, I'll send you this poster from a small study that was done years ago, which does include weight loss. There's actually a couple of things that other people have done that include statistics on weight loss, which are comparable to, other weight-focused interventions. But we don't collect that data because it sort of feels more problematic than beneficial.
Rebecca, can I jump in here?
Sure. Hi.
Hi. So this is Michelle May. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to attend, but I was able to. And I first of all just want to thank you, Rebecca. You've done an amazing job. And I just am sitting here almost overwhelmed by the fact that Rebecca initially, before she became our Director of Workplace Wellness, was one of our facilitators. And for any of you who are sitting here thinking, wow, that seems like a lot of information, or wow, I just want you to know that she has, in a very articulate way, demonstrated the purpose of our trainings and our programs, because our mission is to share this approach as far and as wide as we can. And she has shown you that simply by doing the training and practicing and integrating these concepts into your personal and professional life, you have a way of articulating this in a way. So I want to just really say specifically to you, Rebecca, you did a great job, and I'm very proud. And for anybody who's listening, you can do this too. You have the ability to teach this in an effective way. I've been listening to the questions. They're such great questions, and they really get at the heart of what makes mindful eating so powerful for helping people who've struggled for a long time. And I want to use the weight question and the logging question to bounce off of that, because indeed most of the people you work with have tried many weight loss programs. They come to you saying that they need weight loss. Your boss is telling you to find a weight loss program for your employees or for your clients or your patients. So we completely understand that, and unfortunately sometimes we end up in a bait and switch situation where we don't actually say this is not a weight loss program. We know it's not focused on weight loss. We just say we're going to help people change the way that they think about eating and physical activity, and let things fall where they might, and really in the long run help people stop focusing on an external outcome like weight and really begin to focus on the internal processes that ultimately lead to a sustainable, healthy lifestyle. So if I could just expand on the concept of mindfulness and weight for a moment, your weight reflects past behaviors, it reflects genetics, it reflects age and hormones and activity level. It reflects all kinds of things that you have no control over right now from the past sense. Wanting to lose weight is about wanting to change the future. Indeed, you can't change the future right now. The only thing you have any control over is the decision you make in the next 3 seconds, and the 3 seconds after that, and the 3 seconds after that. So the power of mindfulness is helping people begin to focus on the only thing that they have any control over at all, which is how they respond in the present moment. It gives them response ability, which ultimately leads to them feeling great, having more energy, in many cases potentially losing weight, though again, I completely agree with what Rebecca said. That's not the reason to do it, but it might be a side effect for some people. Likewise with logging and weighing and measuring, it's a tool, and for some people it can be an awareness tool. It's just that for many of the people that we work with, they've done that in the old forms. The old-fashioned form was writing everything down and checking boxes on their little sheet for their exchanges or whatever the program was. So that's nothing new. It's just adding technology to it. The truth of the matter is it still keeps people externally focused and can contribute to guilt and a misplacement of energy. The whole purpose of this is ultimately to get people focused on expending or investing their energy in ways that lead to them feeling grounded and centered and balanced and whole and healthy and energetic, not on was I good today or bad today? Did I eat the right thing? Did I do enough steps or whatever it is? So I just want to thank you for letting me jump in there and echo that, and thank all of you for participating in this call.
Thank you, Michelle. That was also well said. While you were talking, I was thinking that I think one of the difficulties that many of you may have is that you get this personally. You believe in it and you'd love to expand it into your practice or bring it to your organization, but you have people who are decision makers who don't yet get it. And so if all of this is too much, there's, a couple of mini conversations to have, which I have seen seem to resonate with everyone or with most people. And one of those is what Michelle was referring to, is essentially this program, even if it's brought in as a weight management program, what you can say about it is that it helps people change their beliefs and thoughts and feelings. It helps them make changes on the inside so the changes on the outside will last. And to most people, no matter what their profession or what their level in the company or who you're talking to, they get the importance of that. So, one of the things I wanted to say is that if you are in a place where you want to bring this conversation to the table, to other people in your organization or to colleagues, but you're not sure how to do it because it's overwhelming, I get that. Call me. I would love to get on a phone call with you. I've done that with a few people. I've talked about it long enough that I'm comfortable with it. I can kind of address the weight issue tactfully but impactfully. So please feel free to use me as a resource if you want to kind of help shift the conversation but aren't sure how to go about that.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Sure.
We have another question from Christine. Christine says, I'm a dietitian in a hospital outpatient setting, and I recently participated in a live workshop. I found it worked well in a group setting, but it would be hard to apply in individual consultations when I may only get one or a few sessions, especially when patients are often referred by physicians for weight loss, or the patient expects or wants a more structured weight loss plan. Will the training for coaching that will be available early next year be a better fit for healthcare professionals working one-on-one with patients?
Yes, definitively yes. So we really understand the gap in, I think that we've done a really great job of providing the structure for how to do this in a group setting. And what the training for coaching will do is provide a similar structure for how to do this in a one-on-one setting, kind of no matter where you're speaking with a patient or client. So the answer is yes, and I would be happy, Christine, to give you some more details about it. If you just give me a call or drop me an email, we can set up some time to chat.
Great.
If I could piggyback off of that, so this is Michelle May again. So we have many people who have done our workshop training who use this individually, and so I want to kind of correct a little bit of what I heard in terms of that it would be hard to do this in an individual setting. So the truth is you can't really and wouldn't be expected to teach all of these concepts with one-on-one. To go through a workshop like this wouldn't be appropriate in a clinical setting or in a coaching setting. The way that I would recommend you do this if you are currently, if you're working with clients one-on-one coaching or a clinician, is to have them read the materials on their own separately, and that you invest the time that you have with them in that individual setting to address the challenges that they're having. And again, as Rebecca's referred to, in our current training and much more so in our new coach training, we'll be focusing on the individual counseling skills and how to use the mindful eating cycle to listen to what your patients or your clients are saying so that you can really understand where their struggle is. Unfortunately, the mindset is, well, if I only have 10 or 15 minutes, I can't really teach them mindful eating, so I have no choice but to give them a diet or send them back to, whatever their diet of choice is. And I would just say that even something as simple as, you've done a lot of dieting, and I've seen how hard you've tried to make these changes last, and my recommendation would not be to try another diet. For the next week or two until I see you again, whenever you feel like eating, pause and ask yourself, am I hungry? And begin to notice whether you're having physical symptoms of hunger or whether that simple question makes you more aware of environmental and emotional triggers that are driving the desire to eat. And when you come back in a couple of weeks, let's talk about that and see if we can start to understand really the challenges that you're facing and find a more helpful way of approaching the challenges that you have, because dieting doesn't make a big difference in the long run because it's only focused on what you eat, how much you eat, and where you invest your energy. Those are all important, but they're only a third of the decisions that you're making.
Great. So then I have one more question from Deb. This program really appeals to me, and I have tried it several times, but always seem to revert back to old habits after the initial few weeks. How can I stay on track?
That's a great question, Deb. Thank you. I just want to first say that mindful eating, making this type of transformation is, mindful eating is a simple concept, but it's not easy. And, in the transformation, we're not only changing our beliefs and thoughts and behaviors around food, but, all of the kind of supporting struggles underneath it and all of the things that are related to it. So, I guess what I would suggest is, number one, don't give up. Number two, we could chat a little bit about connecting you with the coach. I think that for many people, the workshops are the gateway to transformation, and much happens in those 8 weeks. Many people need a little more support and accountability after that. They need to continue to work with someone on specific issues where they can dig a little more deeply and maybe have some accountability to sticking to new, thought, feeling, behavior patterns. So I would consider working with a mindful eating coach. We could connect afterwards, and I could, help you identify a few people that you might want to work with. And I guess I would also ask that you think a little bit about where is, kind of what are the tripping points for you? Where is the decision point, or what are the decision points that you struggle with most? And consider just addressing those one at a time. Maybe even consider, where is the door open for me for change? What is something that I could address confidently and have some success with? Because I think when we can build success and have personal wins in one area, even if it's a very small piece of the whole cycle, then we can build confidence and inspiration and motivation to continue to make progress in other areas. And again, Deb, please feel free to reach out to me after the webinar is over, and we can talk a little bit more about that, and I can maybe get you connected with some additional support.
Great, thank you, Rebecca.
So Sarah, I am aware of the time. Is that the end of our questions? I'm happy to stay on if there's any extras, and if not, I will wrap it up.
Yeah, that actually was the last question. If any of you have any other questions that haven't been answered, feel free to give us a call or send us an email. And great job, Rebecca.
Thank you, Sarah and Michelle. Thanks for being here, and to all of you who came live today and who will listen via the recording. Thank you for your time and energy, and I hope to chat with you soon. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.